What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to the returning viewers. And if you're brand new here, welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you guys about how I get deer on my food plots before it gets dark out. And there's several ways that we can do this, but first of all, I just want to say that even if you do all of these steps completely perfect, there is also things out there that are outside of our control that might prevent them from getting to your food plot before it gets dark out. And for example, I was sitting on a food plot for a PM sit one time, and as a herd of about 5 or 6 does were coming into the food plot, I saw 2 coyotes come running out of the woods, chased them all over a hayfield, and then they bolted off in the complete opposite direction. So had that happened maybe 100 yards earlier in the woods, I wouldn't have even seen that happen. I would have been sitting there on the food source wondering what I was doing wrong. Was the wind the wrong direction? Are they smelling me? What's going on? But in some cases, there's just things outside of our control that are going to prevent them from getting there. So let's talk about the things we can control and what we can do to really maximize our percentage of getting these deer on your food source before it gets dark out. So the first thing is we need to be absolutely sure that we have the number one food source in the area. You need to make sure that your food plot is more attractive than any other food sources. So any other egg fields, any of your other neighbors that might have food plots. So right now I don't have food plots in. It is June right now, and I always do fall focused food plots. So I don't have anything planted in my food plots right now, but I do have my garden in. And after I shoot this video, I'm actually going to go get some more fencing for around that garden because the deer and the rabbits are getting in there and they are absolutely hammering my peas right now. This is also why I love planting peas in food plots, because deer just absolutely love them. I have about 20 plus different varieties of plants planted in that garden. They are solely focusing on the peas right now. But because of this, what is happening is they are going and they are eating those peas because they're more attractive than anything else available in the woods right now. And there's a lot available for them to eat right now. Everything's leafed out, everything's green. There's even berries dropping off of trees. Those are super sweet, and the animals are absolutely loving those up too. But they love those peas and they're going in to get those. So this is what we want to do in the fall, is make sure you have that number one food source so that they are coming there first. That is that first thing they want to get. As soon as it starts getting dark out, they're going to head there first. If you don't have that number one food source, they are going to instead head to wherever that number one food source is. And if you're number 2, 3, 4 on the list, they're going to get to you after dark, because they're only going to hit up each of these food sources for maybe 20 minutes max before they move on to another food source and check that out. But if we're trying to get them there before dark, we need to make sure we're number one on that list. So do everything you can, get those soil tests, make sure you are providing everything at the optimal pH and the nutrition. So we're talking about the fertilizer here for whatever crops you're planting. Make sure you're planting attractive crops for your area. So in southeastern Wisconsin, where there's a lot of ag, I already said I focus on peas, but I also put beans in that mix. And I also put in brassicas on half of the food plot. So I split the food plot in two, beans and peas on half, brassicas on the other half, and then I rotate those each year because the brassicas aren't great to have in the same spot of the food plot year after year because of your soil quality. But I also will then fill in any bare spots with a cereal grain like winter rye, mostly because I am in Wisconsin. If you're further south, you can use those other cereal grains. They'll do just well for you. But that really gives me that diversity in that food plot, and it makes it so I have the number one food source. Now, if I'm in northwestern Wisconsin on my property up there, I solely focus on winter rye up there, and that's because it is way more browse tolerant. There is no egg up there. We are talking woods and trees as far as the eye can see. And if I plant all of those brassicas, beans, peas up there, they're just going to get buzzed down, nipped off, and killed before we even get into the season. So I focus on that browse tolerant winter rye, and I have great success with that up there. So now let's get into the second thing you want to do once you have that number one food source. So if you put in this beautiful, awesome food plot in the middle of an open field, they're not going to go eat it before it gets dark out. You need to give them some screening and some cover around this food plot. So what I do, if it is in like a more open field areas, I do use switchgrass. We put switchgrass in. Now that does take a couple years to get fully established, so plan ahead if that is going to be what you plan on screening these food plots with. It'll only get a few feet tall that first year, but by about year 3, it's going to be taller than you and be a really beautiful screen around your food plot as long as you take good care of it. If you want to know how to get that established, I have other videos completely devoted to that. It's a pretty hefty process, so I don't want to go over it in full depth in this video. So once you do have that screen around that food plot, if this is somewhere like in the woods, it could just be that you put this in a thicker area of the woods. The natural habitat around the food plot is that thick cover. I also have one of my favorite food plots in northwestern Wisconsin is just completely surrounded by topography. If you guys have listened to me in some of my other videos, I talk about it. I call it my crater food plot because it really looks like a meteor crater that is just this bowl, and the food plot's down at the bottom of that bowl, and that topography hides that food plot, and they feel really safe and secure coming in there, especially because I'm not blocking off the exit and entrance to it with thick cover, so they feel like they can leave any direction at any time. But those sight lines are really cut down on looking into that food plot while they're in there, and they absolutely love that. So just make sure there's that immediate wall of cover or screen around the edges of the food plot. They're really going to enjoy that, and that will make them feel safe and secure coming into that food plot before it gets dark out. Now that we've addressed the immediate edges of the food plot, we want to talk about layered cover or depth of cover off of that food plot as well. So if we go back to that big open field analogy, if we put that food plot in the middle of a big open field and we put a nice screen of switchgrass around that food plot, but as soon as you get outside of that switchgrass, it's a big open field, they're still not going to come to it before it is dark out. So we need to make sure we have that layered cover or depth of cover leaving the food plot as well. Deer will not walk out in the broad daylight open to get to your food source if they can so help it. So if you provide them with a nice thick area to travel through to get to that food plot, even if your food plot itself's out on kind of like a peninsula, but they have that mainland to get to the tip of that peninsula, that will work. But this can also just be in a really thick area of the woods, and they have depth of cover off into every single direction, but you need that cover as well. So this is where you want to get rid of those high canopy trees if that's what you're dealing with, so you can get that sunlight down to the forest floor. Let all of that stuff down at the level of the deer grow up and thicken up so that you have this cover leading off into the woods away from your food plot, so that they have cover as they head to your food source in the daylight hours right before it gets dark. Now, the next thing we want to focus on is bedding areas. So where are the deer coming from before they head to this food source? And that is, of course, their bedding areas. So if their bedding area is a mile away, they now have to walk a mile in order to get to your food source before dark, and they might just not get there in time. It might take them so long to get there that they just don't get there. So you want to establish bedding areas close to your food sources. Now, these bedding areas can literally be off the edge of your food sources on the other side of that screening, like that switchgrass. I do have doe family groups bed right off the edge of my southeastern Wisconsin food plot, and that is a very tricky hunt then, because you have to get in and out of there without being detected, with them being like literally 50 yards away from the stand when you get in and out of it. Now, I do have the mecca of all hunter ingress and egress into that stand. It's actually cut into a trench half into the ground and then covered in fencing with vines growing over it and switchgrass planted along the sides of it. So it's really good cover. I'm essentially walking in through a tunnel, and it does allow me to get into that stand when those does are just 50 yards off the edge of the plot. And then, of course, those bucks will find that next layer of cover beyond that, and the mature bucks are typically the next one beyond that. So depending on what you're focused on hunting here, you do want pocketed bedding leading off of the edge of this food plot, because you can stack more deer closer to the food source. Now, if you are putting this in for the first time, if you just do that first level of bedding, your does and fawns are going to bed there, and wherever those does and fawns were bedding, now those bucks can move in there, so they'll be closer and so on. So as in an ideal situation, you would want to have all of that pocketed bedding available for all of the different demographics of your deer herd that don't all necessarily want to stay bedded down right on top of each other. But by creating a bedding area, you move all of the other natural bedding areas closer to you, or they all like move up to the next one closer to you. So they're all closer simply by putting in one bedding area. But yes, ideally you would want to put in several, but that ends up being a lot of work. So whatever you can do, if you want to go all the way and go to that 100% level, put in those bedding areas. Otherwise, just get one in there and it's going to move everybody closer. The closer they are, the more likely they are to get to you before it gets dark out. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is if we have all of this layered cover, we have that screening, we have these bedding areas in. Now, in an ideal world, this is all very thick cover leading off the edge of your food plot. Now, the issue you're going to have is the deer have to kind of crawl and weave and bend and climb over and under and whatever, all of this thick cover to get to your food plot. Well, we want to speed them up a bit. While they're on the hoof, we want to get them moving a little quicker. Now, we don't want them to run. We still want them to be safe, secure, and just walking through the woods. But as they get to us, we definitely want to put in those man-made deer trails. We don't want these to be straight like shooting lanes, or you're just creating that open field situation all over again. A straight shooting lane through the woods is nothing but a little skinny open field to a deer. They don't like going on those. So you do want these man-made deer trails to bend and weave their way off of your food plot and to those bedding areas, and they will take that trail because it's the easiest path of movement through the woods. It'll also speed them up because they can move on it more quickly even at a walk than trying to climb through some thick areas of the shrubs and the trees around you. So as we get them on these trails, that's how they're going to get to you faster. We're going to get them to you before it gets dark out. Now that you've put in all of these attractions and you have this built absolutely perfectly and everything is working for you as well as it can for the things that you can control, we need to talk about how you're going to hunt this. Now, ideally, I don't like hunting food sources, although I do hunt a food source in southeastern Wisconsin simply because that is a micro parcel. I am just working with probably about an acre, maybe a little bit more on the back of a property. That's all I have under my control there. So I have to hunt the food source because I simply don't have control to hunt off of the food source. But in an ideal world, you do want to hunt that man-made deer trail leading into that food source because, again, now you're jumping the string essentially on them and getting closer to them before they even get to that food source. So what you're really looking to do is get as close to that bedding area as you can before they get up and start moving. They will then move right under you. You can create this into like a pinch point. I've talked about that in other videos as well if you guys want to go check those out. But they will essentially go right under you through that pinch point that you've created. You can dress that up at that stand location with a water hole, mock scrape, get them coming through that specific place on their way to that food source. And the reason for this is as they pass by you, they're only going to be in your immediate vicinity for maybe a couple minutes as they pass by. You'll have your shot on them if you want it or not, depending on how selective you are with your harvest. And then they'll move on to that food source and feed on that food source. Now, typically they'll be on that food source for 10, 15, 20 minutes. It depends. They don't just sit and feed on it all night though. So that's the issue though, is if you're hunting on that food source and they're out in front of you for 20 minutes, and again, how selective you're being with your harvest. And I mean, if it's bow season, this food plot might be so big that they're not in range during the entire time that they're on the food plot. So you risk though, while you're sitting on stand, that even if the predominant wind is dumping off and is in a great location for you to not be blowing out onto that food source, there's a chance that the wind swirls or something while you're out there. All of a sudden it swirls, it hits them and comes back towards you, and now you've just busted that food source because they want it to be safe and secure in order to go there, and they just smelled human out on that food source when they thought they were secure, and it's going to be days or weeks before they return to this movement that you've been planning on, and you basically screwed up this area of the woods by being in their vicinity for longer than is required to take your shot and get out of there. Or not take your shot and let them move on. So we really don't want to be sitting on these food sources if we can help it. Like I said, I do though. Now that stand is set up, like I said, very stealthily. I can get in and out of that very easily without spooking deer. I have every wall except the front opening of that box blind to help minimize how much of my scent is even blowing around in the area. That is specifically set up that I only have a shot right in front, and if anything happens to move behind me, which they don't because I have that trench behind me, but in that case, I am essentially foregoing being able to see 360 degrees around me in order to only see in front, and then keep that wind from like really blowing across me and dumping out around me, and then risking that gets looped back in on them while they're feeding there. So if you guys feel like you got some value out of this video, go ahead, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this video, YouTube thinks you're gonna enjoy this one. Otherwise, go check out this one, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.